Now that we have our composite, it's time to preview it in motion. We've mainly been looking at a single frame, which in this case allows us to confirm that the merge operations are looking how we want, but ultimately we want to be able to watch this in motion. So if I hit the play key, I can see that Nuke is trying its best to play back this image. But you can see right here, it is achieving a frame per second of less than 1 frame per second. And that's understandable. It's reading in 3 different EXR image sequences, so it taxes the disks. It's performing merge operations. All these operations are taking place, we can tell by the yellow outlining in the timeline view. So if we wanted to be able to watch this completely, we could wait till the play bar is cached in, but then we would have additional problems. For example, the moment when we start zooming the image or panning around the image, we have problems with the cache now being out of date. And we do have tools such as the full frame processing option in the viewer to disable this, but once again, we're going to be limited in what we can do in the viewer. Really what we want to be able to do is a temporary render. But I'm not ready to render out an output just yet. Really what I'd like to be able to do is a RAM preview. Well, a preview from RAM in Nuke is called a flipbook. And in order to access the flipbook options, I need to select the node that I want to flipbook, because remember, I can flipbook from any stage in the node tree. Well, usually when I'm trying to find out what the final composite is going to look like, I'm going to want to view the last node in the node tree. In this case, that's going to be my viewer 1. So I'm going to select viewer 1, and I'm going to go to render flipbook selected. There's a few other ways I can do this. There's obviously the hotkey of Alt F, and then down here in the viewer, I have a flipbook button. So whichever way I do it, I'm going to do flipbook selected, and that's going to pop up my flipbook dialog box. Here I have a bunch of options about how I can flipbook my image sequence. But for now, I'm just going to leave these all at default and say OK. So what has just happened is we haven't exited Nuke, but we've opened up a new program in the foreground called FrameCycler. And if you didn't know it, when you bought a Nuke or NukeX license, you got a free license of Iridis FrameCycler, which is a wonderful playback system it's a whole program on its own, really. It can only be launched from Nuke as it's packaged with Nuke, but it is Nuke's default flipbook program. So it's just a wonderful playback program. It has tons of options that I'm not going to go into at this time, but here is our render.clip. It's going to play back. If I hit the spacebar is going to be the playback option in FrameCycler. Then you can see I can achieve 24 frames per second, and I can zoom and pan around the image all I want. I can do lots of other things inside of FrameCycler, but that is not the point of today's lesson. But when I'm done with this, I simply close the program, since it is a separate program, and the flipbook is gone. It is temporary. It was in RAM for fast playback. It didn't take up any of my hard drive space. So for the temporary need that I had to review my work, that worked wonderfully. FrameCycler is not your only option for flipbooking, however. So if I flipbook, I have to make sure I select the right node. If I flipbook select it again, the first option is what program I use to flipbook. So FrameCycler is the default, but you can see if I open this dropdown, I have installed another option, which is Hero. So if you are a customer who has bought Hero or Hero Player, then you can actually enable Hero as the flipbook playback system, which I've done here. There's a whole list of other programs, RV, but we're going to be using Hero. We have a wonderful series on Hero as well, but we'll talk about it just for the flipbooking purposes from Nuke for now. And now I'm going to focus on a few other of these settings inside of Flipbook. So our first option allows us to take the view settings from different view nodes within our node tree. Once again, if you only have, if you don't want to take the view settings, or your viewer settings are the same as your project settings, then there won't be any difference here. But perhaps you set up a specific view settings inside of a view node, and that's what you want to be able to flipbook. This allows you to not have to set all these settings all over again. We have a region of interest enabled checkbox that allows us, when we're rendering out our flipbook, if we have region of interest on a heavy script, this will allow us to see just that small portion of it and make for a much faster render. We can say which channels we want to output. In this case, we're going to do red, green, blue, and alpha, but perhaps you only need one of these channels or just the alpha. So you'd be able to, once again, speed up your render by limiting the channels that are rendered. We have a frame range, same as with our viewer settings, where we can choose the input from the individual read nodes, or we can choose global for our global timeline. We can use proxies if we've enabled proxy read nodes. We can render in the background, which actually allows us to continue to use Nuke interactively while the render happens. This is wonderful if you want to continue some work that you know you're still in need of, but you still are able to check a flipbook at that particular time. Make sure your computer can handle rendering and interactive Nuke usage at the same time, though. As you can see, we have delete existing temporary files, and that is by default checked. And that really makes the flipbook the temporary RAM preview that we expect it to be. But if we uncheck that, we actually would be able to then flipbook the same scene from the same node without any rendering. We once again have our lookup table options, which in this case are going to be our project setting defaults, which is sRGB. And if we have audio available, we could add that to the flipbook for synchronization for animation or something along those lines. Okay, so once again, now this time I have Hero selected. That's the only thing I changed. And I'm going to say OK. So I get the same processing dialog box. And it's going to take a little while to render out those frames. Once again, not necessarily saving to disk. And here we are, Hero Player. And just like we saw in Frame Cycler, we have our rendered image. And we have our playback controls. One reason I like Hero instead of Frame Cycler in this case, they're both very capable playback systems, but the keyboard shortcuts and most of the interface really is going to be very similar between Hero and Nuke. So if you're familiar with one, you're familiar with the other. Versus Frame Cycler or RV, maybe you're having to customize keyboard shortcuts so you don't get confused, or just learning entirely new keyboard shortcuts. There's the added bonus that if you are using a full Hero workflow to manage your edit, then once again you already have this software, and there's a lot of functionality built in to having your RAM previews available to the Hero project. But that we'll save for another chapter. For now, this is just a playback tool, and you can see it works just like Hero should, which is very similar to how Nuke does. And the moment we're done with it, we just close out of Hero, don't save that project, and we're back into Nuke. So flipbooking is a wonderful way to see a temporary full frame playback speed version of your composite. But in the next chapter, we'll talk about how we can actually render out to disk our final images.